They called him a former slave. America called him less than human. But by 1910, John Merrick had quietly accumulated more wealth than the white mayors, judges, and factory owners who once held absolute power over his life. In Durham, North Carolina, he built what historians would later call the original Black Wall Street, not Tulsa, Durham, a fortress of black capital. Decades before the Greenwood District existed, insurance companies, banks, real estate, all controlled by black hands in the deepest Jim Crow South. This is the story of the Durham Dynasty and the man who made it all possible. John Merrick was born into slavery in 1859 in Sampson County, North Carolina. His mother was a house slave. His father was the white plantation owner who never acknowledged him. When the Civil War ended, Merrick was 6 years old, illiterate, and he possessed nothing but his freedom. This was the starting line for a man who would one day control more capital than most white businessmen in the state. The odds were not just stacked against him, they were designed to crush him entirely. In the decade following emancipation, North Carolina was a battlefield. The promise of Reconstruction gave way to the terror of redemption politics. Black men who dared to vote were beaten. Black families who dared to own land were burned out. The Ku Klux Klan rode openly through the countryside, and the law did nothing to stop them. This was the world John Merrick navigated as a young man. He had no formal education. He had no family wealth. He had no powerful connections. What he had was an understanding that survival required strategy, and strategy required capital. Merrick's first trade was bricklaying. He learned the craft as a teenager and spent years hauling mortar and laying stone across the growing towns of North Carolina. It was back-breaking work with low wages, but Merrick watched carefully. He studied the men who hired him. He noticed which businesses thrived and which ones failed. He realized that the men who controlled services controlled communities, so he pivoted. In his early 20s, Merrick apprenticed as a barber in Raleigh. Within a few years, he had mastered the trade, but Raleigh was not his destination. Durham was calling. In the 1880s, Durham was transforming from a railroad stop into an industrial boomtown. The tobacco industry was exploding, and with it came wealthy white industrialists who needed services. Merrick saw the opportunity. He opened a barbershop on Main Street that catered exclusively to the white elite of Durham. His clients included Washington Duke, the tobacco magnate whose family name would later grace a university. Merrick cut the hair of bankers, factory owners, and politicians. He listened to their conversations about investments, insurance, and real estate. He was not just a barber, he was a student of capital operating behind enemy lines. By the 1890s, Merrick owned multiple barbershops and had accumulated significant savings, but he understood that personal wealth was fragile. Black prosperity in the Jim Crow South could be wiped out overnight by a mob, a corrupt court, or a simple refusal of service. What Black Durham needed was institutional power. It needed businesses that could protect and multiply Black wealth collectively. Merrick found his answer in insurance. In 1898, John Merrick joined forces with Dr. Aaron McDuffie Moore, a physician, and a young accountant named Charles Clinton Spaulding. Together, they founded the North Carolina Mutual and Provident Association. The concept was simple but revolutionary. White insurance companies refused to cover Black lives. They considered Black Americans uninsurable risks, too poor, too sick, too likely to die young from violence or neglect. Merrick and his partners saw this racist exclusion as an opportunity. If white companies would not insure Black families, then Black families would insure themselves. The early years were brutal. The company nearly collapsed multiple times. Spaulding, who would later become known as the greatest Black businessman of his generation, personally walked the dusty roads of rural North Carolina, selling nickel and dime policies to sharecroppers. Merrick invested his barbershop profits to keep the company solvent. Dr. Moore provided medical examinations for pennies. They were building something from nothing, and failure meant losing everything. But they did not fail. By 1900, North Carolina Mutual had survived its infancy. Policies were being paid, claims were being honored. Word spread through Black communities across the state. A company existed that would actually pay out when a Black man died. A company that treated Black families with dignity. The trickle of customers became a stream, and the stream became a flood. By 1906, the company was processing thousands of policies. Merrick was no longer just a barber with investments. He was the president of a growing financial institution. He moved the company headquarters to Parish Street in Durham, a strip that would soon become the most concentrated block of Black wealth in America. The foundation was laid, the machine was operational, and John Merrick was just getting started. In the next 4 years, he would build an empire that would make him the richest Black man in North Carolina and create a dynasty that would outlive him by more than a century. By 1910, North Carolina Mutual had transformed from a struggling startup into the largest Black-owned insurance company in America. The numbers were staggering. The company held over $200,000 in assets. It processed more than 100,000 policies annually. It employed dozens of agents who fanned out across the South, selling coverage to Black families from Virginia to Florida. The premiums flowing into Parish Street totaled tens of thousands of dollars every month. John Merrick, the former slave who once laid bricks for pennies, was now presiding over a financial empire. But Merrick was not building alone. The brain trust he assembled was extraordinary. Dr. Aaron McDuffie Moore served as the company's medical director and moral compass. A graduate of Shaw University and Leonard Medical School, Moore was the first Black physician in Durham. He provided the scientific legitimacy that made the insurance model viable. Every policy was backed by genuine actuarial assessment, not guesswork. Moore's presence told the Black community that this company was serious, professional, and built to last. Then there was Charles Clinton Spaulding. If Merrick was the visionary and Moore was the validator, Spaulding was the executor. He started as a general manager, but quickly proved himself the most gifted businessman of his generation. Spaulding modernized the company's operations, implemented rigorous accounting standards, and expanded the agent network exponentially. White business publications would later call him the greatest Negro businessman in American history. In 1910, he was still Merrick's apprentice, learning at the feet of the master. The insurance company was the engine, but Merrick's empire extended far beyond policies and premiums. He understood that true wealth required diversification. In 1908, Merrick and his partners founded the Mechanics and Farmers Bank, one of the first Black-owned banks in North Carolina. M&F Bank was not just a financial institution, it was a weapon against economic apartheid. White banks refused to lend to Black borrowers. They redlined Black neighborhoods. They trapped Black families in cycles of debt and dispossession. M&F Bank broke that chain. It provided mortgages to Black homebuyers. It offered business loans to Black entrepreneurs. It gave the Black community of Durham something white America had always denied them: access to capital. By 1910, Merrick's personal real estate holdings alone were valued at over $30,000, an enormous sum in an era when the average American earned less than $500 per year. He owned commercial properties on Parish Street. He owned residential lots across Durham. He owned the buildings that housed his businesses. Every dollar he earned was reinvested into assets that would appreciate and generate more wealth. This was not luck. This was strategy executed with precision over decades. The transformation of Durham itself was proof of Merrick's impact. Parish Street had become the most concentrated block of Black wealth in the entire nation. Within a few hundred yards stood the headquarters of North Carolina Mutual, the offices of Mechanics and Farmers Bank, a Black-owned newspaper, Black-owned retail stores, and professional offices filled with Black doctors, lawyers, and accountants. Booker T. Washington himself visited Durham and declared it the finest example of Black economic achievement in America. W.E.B. Du Bois, who disagreed with Washington on almost everything, came to Durham and reached the same conclusion. This was Black Wall Street before Tulsa even existed. The community transformation was not just commercial. Merrick and his partners poured money into institutions that would uplift generations. They funded Lincoln Hospital, the first Black hospital in Durham, ensuring that Black patients would receive dignified medical care. They supported schools, churches, and civic organizations. They created a middle class in a city where Black poverty had once been universal. By 1910, Durham had more Black-owned businesses per capita than any city in America. The model was working, but Merrick's vision extended beyond his own generation. He was consciously building a dynasty. He trained younger executives within North Carolina Mutual, creating a pipeline of talent that would sustain the company after his death. He brought family members into the business, ensuring that Merrick blood would remain connected to Merrick wealth. He structured his holdings to survive him, placing assets in corporate entities rather than personal accounts. This was not vanity, this was architecture. He was constructing an institution designed to outlast any single human life. The partners around him followed the same philosophy. Dr. Moore invested in real estate alongside Merrick. Spalding accumulated equity in every venture the group launched. They were not just colleagues, they were a dynasty in formation, a network of Black families whose fortunes were intertwined and whose children would inherit not just money, but power. In 1910, John Merrick stood at the absolute peak of his influence. He was the richest Black man in North Carolina, perhaps the richest Black man in the entire South. His empire was generating wealth, creating jobs, and transforming a city. John Merrick died on August 6, 1919. He was 60 years old. The former slave who had built an empire from nothing left behind a fortune estimated at over $100,000 and institutions worth far more. Durham mourned him as a king. Thousands attended his funeral. White business leaders sent condolences. Black families across the South wept for a man most had never met, but whose company had paid their claims, honored their dignity, and proven that Black wealth was possible. But Merrick had prepared for this moment. The dynasty did not die with him. Charles Clinton Spalding assumed the presidency of North Carolina Mutual and guided the company through the next 4 decades. Under his leadership, the company did not merely survive, it dominated. By 1945, North Carolina Mutual had assets exceeding $40 million, making it the largest Black-owned business in America. The Roaring Twenties brought expansion. The Great Depression brought crisis, but the company paid every valid claim, while white insurers collapsed across the nation. World War II brought a new generation of Black policyholders. Through it all, the Parrish Street Empire endured. The dynasty extended through bloodlines and mentorship alike. Asa Spalding, nephew of C.C. Spalding, became the first Black actuary in America and eventually led the company himself. The Moore family remained connected through Lincoln Hospital and real estate holdings. Merrick's descendants maintained positions of influence in Durham for generations. This was not accidental. It was the deliberate architecture of a man who understood that individual wealth is fragile, but institutional wealth compounds across time. The institutions Merrick founded survived challenges that destroyed lesser enterprises. They survived Jim Crow terrorism. They survived the 1921 Tulsa massacre that annihilated the other Black Wall Street. They survived segregation, redlining, and decades of economic warfare. They survived because they were built on solid foundations by men who understood that Black prosperity in America required fortresses, not tents. Today, Parrish Street still stands in downtown Durham. The buildings are older now, and the neighborhood has changed, but Mechanics and Farmers Bank remains operational, one of the oldest continuously operating Black-owned banks in America. It still provides mortgages, business loans, and financial services to the community. Over a century after John Merrick helped found it, M&F Bank continues the mission of putting capital into Black hands. North Carolina Mutual survived into the 21st century as well, though its journey was more turbulent. The company faced the same pressures that challenged all traditional insurers: changing markets, new competitors, and shifting demographics. It eventually demutualized and restructured, but for over 100 years, it remained the flagship of Black American enterprise, a living monument to the vision of a former slave who refused to accept the limits white America imposed. The modern inheritors of Merrick's legacy are everywhere in Durham. They run venture capital firms in Research Triangle Park. They lead departments at Duke University. They operate tech startups and real estate development companies. They may not carry the Merrick name, but they walk on ground he prepared. The wealth he generated, the institutions he built, and the model he proved possible created the conditions for every successful Black entrepreneur who followed. This story matters because it has been deliberately erased. When Americans discuss Black Wall Street, they speak of Tulsa in 1921. They rarely mention that Durham's Parish Street predated Greenwood by decades and survived when Greenwood was burned to the ground. The erasure is not accidental. Acknowledging Durham means acknowledging that Black Americans built sustainable, generational wealth under the most hostile conditions imaginable. It means admitting that the poverty white America imposed on Black communities was not natural or inevitable, but constructed and maintained through violence and policy. John Merrick proved what was possible when Black capital was organized, protected, and invested strategically. He did not wait for permission from white America. He did not beg for inclusion in white institutions. He built his own. He created insurance for people white companies would not cover. He created banking for people white banks would not serve. He created wealth in a nation designed to keep his people poor. The Durham dynasty is not just history. It is a blueprint. It is proof that the obstacles were never insurmountable, only deliberately maintained. And it is a reminder that the new Black meccas rising across America today stand on foundations laid by men like John Merrick, the richest Black man in North Carolina, the architect of Parish Street and the patriarch of a dynasty that refused to die. Who will build the next Black Wall Street? Let us know in the comments. And do not forget to subscribe for more stories of Black wealth and power at Black status.